Welcome. It's November 18th, a Thursday, 4 o'clock here in Western Canada. And welcome to a session which we've variously named for everything from Go Forth and Innovate to Innovations and the Resilience of SMEs. We've got a great group assembled today, as you've probably read in the newsletters. But before we begin, I'll be asking each to introduce themselves and give you a brief presentation before we get into general discussion and field questions as a Q&A. And I do ask those of you that are online to please keep your mic muted if you're not called on or presenting. But here's a little bit of a background just to get us into motion. We've been doing surveys now since 2015 on the economic resilience of this province, but maybe for this session, even more importantly, have been our findings as it relates to the so-called innovation ecosystem and the relevance of innovation for economic diversification. And here's some of the highlights of this more recent, that is October, survey results. They are supporting views that innovation is key to economic resilience, and where economic resilience is weak, it's weak in all professions, public services, and industries. And that's primarily because, at least in Alberta, we haven't been as diversified an economy, and the heavy reliance on oil and gas has affected literally the entire province, all industries, all services. This is particularly evident in regions and economic sectors where the lack of diversity and a weak culture of innovation prevail. For example, the weak resilience of Edmonton, which, by the way, is heavily reliant on the public services of health, education, and government, lacks diversity and has a weak culture of innovation. Where the energy sector is undergoing a cleaner tech transition and diversification into infotech in Calgary, we see that in the survey that the economic resilience and even their effectiveness of the innovation ecosystem is far superior in Calgary than it is in Edmonton. In fact, Edmonton has swung lower recently because there are some transitions going maybe to try and address some of that weakness. Survey respondents are almost universal in emphasizing the essential role of SMEs, that's small, medium enterprises, in developing economic resilience, and the role of the SMEs and its support of innovation ecosystem for their survival, growth, and retention. The ecosystem is also viewed as stronger in Calgary than in Edmonton, as I noted earlier. And finally, that the most appropriate role for governments in developing resilience was cited as in policies supporting SMEs and the development of manpower fitting for the economy. The spending by government it's not that it's ignored, but the recognition of the relevance of policies and support for SMEs just stands out as head and shoulders above the other options. The survey results continue to reflect the merit of advancing economic resilience through, one, an energy transition, which is underway worldwide, by the way, development of manpower fitting for the economy. And I think the academics or the academic institutions have really suffered through COVID and are beginning to recognize the relevance of manpower coming out of our universities for future economy. And I'm sure, Simon, you'll weigh into that. And thirdly, the critical importance of bottom-up leadership and innovation. Well, here's what our presenters have to say. Let's kick off with you, Irene. I'm delighted to have you, and introduce yourself, and let's hear your presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much, Perry. Can I share my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so my name is Irene Starian, and I'm founder, president, and CEO of Remap, which is a not-for-profit network. And I'm really about manufacturing and SMEs in Canada. My background is industrial engineering, so I come at it from a technology point of view. First of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Remap and what Remap is. And see if I can do this. Okay. And we're really about connecting people and technology. We do three things. We fund, we educate, and we collaborate. First of all, we fund projects which are a mix of hardware, software, and AI, and we focus on the hardware aspect, especially electronics, optics, and material development. And we connect the dots between academia, SMEs, and multinationals through collaborative projects. The second thing that we do is we educate. So we focus on SME digital transformation and connecting between product design and the manufacturing floors. So a lot of SMEs in Canada manufacture for other companies, and they could create their own products. And the lines between product design and manufacturing are blurring with digital twins, 3D printing. And if you're not aware of that quickly changing landscape, you can become obsolete. And third, we think like we're the Uber of manufacturing, because we collaborate across Canada to leverage what we already have and share resources. And one example of that is a local company that was looking to do PPE manufacturing, and they needed to do testing. And they didn't have a lab locally in Canada. There's not too many labs that do blood testing for PPEs. So we were able to connect them with a nuclear testing lab that does radioactive testing, but had the infrastructure in place to actually set up equipment and buy that equipment for PPE testing. So that's what I mean by using the resources that we already have. And where do we fit in terms of accelerating technologies? We're in the technology readiness level 4 to 8. And you can see here that small businesses and SMEs can do a lot through government support, through academic support and labs, but then you get into scaling, and large businesses have a lot more funds and a lot more resources to do that. And what we do is we actually help SMEs find an M&E customer and try to match make between a multinational and a smaller SME, and see whether the M&E is willing to take the risk on the smaller supplier, which is usually more effort and requires more of the M&E's supply chain. And I'd like to start with 6 examples that show that our existing network project partners and how quickly they pivoted to address the immediate needs created by the pandemic. So on this page, there's 3 examples. The first one is Myant. It's a textile and IoT company, and they pivoted to knit reusable PPE masks and sold them online directly from their factory. Prime Minister Trudeau used these masks with a Canadian maple leaf on them. This is the company that tested 3 to 4 versions of this mask every day with their lab partner and came up with a product in a matter of weeks. The second example is actually Sunnybrook Hospital, which is Canada's largest trauma center, and Javelin Technologies, which is a design software company and a 3D printing company. And they work together to design face shields for healthcare providers that they can use for extended periods of time in the hospital, and then can be quickly re-sanitized for reuse. And the last example is Sask Poly, the innovative manufacturing center there, which worked with 3 separate SMEs in the region to manufacture polymer-based masks. All 3 teams provided solutions within weeks of starting this new project. And then the next set of 3 companies, they take longer because they're longer pivots, and they're still ongoing as they develop new ways to prevent the spread of the pandemic. So the first one, Microbonds, uses an antimicrobial silver coating, which has been used in hand sanitizers, but now is being incorporated in textiles, and such as pillowcases, and into conveyor belts for food processing. The second example, FredSense, who's out of Calgary, was working on testing water for heavy metals like lead and arsenic, and they have added testing capability for COVID RNA, given their existing hardware and software platform, which is portable and can yield immediate results for water testing. And the third one, again, it's a long play, but AOMS Technologies, they leverage their power of 5G and wireless sensors to help the construction industry actually pour concrete faster and with more confidence on their curing time. But the same sensor technology can be applied to hospitals and long-term care homes in tracking temperature, humidity, gases, dust, as well as assets. So it can be deployed in hospitals and healthcare centers and medical supply storage rooms to prevent product loss and damage and meet company standards. So you can see by these 3 examples, the resilience of some of these companies in the face of a pandemic. But SMEs are really the foundation of our economic recovery. And I would say 90% of all the jobs in Canada are with SMEs. And I want to show you 4 other examples on how SMEs compete with their multinational counterparts by digitizing and automating and creating business models around their hardware, but include software and AI. And these are ongoing, I'd say, initiatives. Can you see my top screen here if I do this?
Yes.
Okay. And this is what I call kind of the blueprint for innovation, or the secret sauce. So I'm going to try to move our picture over here someplace. There we go. So first of all, this is what they do. First of all, they collaborate from day one between academia, suppliers, and end customers. As you can see here, research, development, design, manufacturing, and the end market all at once. Then second is they shrink the time to market by working in parallel to develop the product, to get the right regulatory approvals. They have demo days, prototypes, road shows, and they continually test their product to market. Third, they gain access to new product introduction, so they can ideate quickly and prototype, but they also create high volume supply chains. And sometimes they need to do dual or triple sourcing of parts. One of our partners was totally stuck because one of their critical parts came from Wuhan, China, and now they have sourced the part in 2 geographies. Number 4 is they create digital business models, and they provide both the hardware as well as a service component like predictive maintenance or reorder of consumable or quality insights. Number 5, they find critical first multinational client, and that's where Remap comes in to help, where we help convince that first multinational client to take a risk. And last but not least, they attract investment and funding in their product through either IRAP, FedDev, trade commissioners, trade missions to other countries, and they're not afraid to go global. So first example is about Novark Technologies out of Vancouver and C-SPAN Vancouver Dry Dock. And this is a collaborative 3D vision system. It's spool welding robot. So the average age right now of a welder is 55, and attracting new talent to the profession is very difficult given the physically demanding work. So Novi, it's a new vision and software system, is attached to a robot arm, and it helps the new generation of welders by eliminating the physical work and adding the digital work required to monitor the robot program and review the data for quality. So C-SPAN is actually able to take on more work and bid on more programs as a result of this enhanced capacity. And so this is a solution for automating manual welding and improving the quality of the weld. The next example is actually a low-cost solution to automate manual assembly and keep the automation flexible. And this is between Apera AI and Magna. And Apera is actually in Vancouver and Magna is in Toronto. So this is a cross-Canada collaboration. This is the AI portion of the software allows for parts to be oriented in any direction and angle and still be placed accurately in the end destination. So this really allows for this operation not to be done manually by a person anymore, but to be done automatically. And Magna, being a multinational company, can purchase for their locations globally. So this is one way in which Apera and AI can scale beyond Canada with Magna. The next one is a bit different because SMEs are not just innovating on the factory floor, but as you've seen with Novark and Apera AI, but they're also in the surgical room. So the operating light that you see here in the photo actually takes images like a high-speed camera and integrates those images with previous MRI data from the patient. So what the surgeon sees is a 3D model of the brain in real time, which makes their job more accurate, faster, and ultimately results in a better patient outcome. The operating room light was totally sourced in Canada, including the casters, and the original prototype was 3D printed at Sunnybrook Hospital. So the team is currently working on new photonics-based treatment methods that are less invasive and can better be customized for treatment on each individual patient. So the surgery room of the future is being developed, and the 7D surgical team is outsourcing the hardware manufacturing, and they're focusing on the software needed to integrate the data.
Okay, so Irene, we've got a few more minutes here. You're near wrap up, I presume?
Yep, this is my last example. This is from Plybos. They developed a ruggedized sensor that can monitor conditions in harsh environments such as aircraft engines or cars. And their differentiated technology has enabled large companies to better monitor their assets. And in this case, it's aircraft engines.
Everybody. if you want to come in for time.
Somebody's not muted.
Yeah, I'm already there. Are you going there now? Yeah.
So I'm going to end here, but I think we have a very vibrant innovation ecosystems, and SMEs in Canada are very resilient and have been demonstrated by both the pandemic and by supply chain constraints in their finding new solutions. I like to think in threes. So start small, think big, and create value.
Excellent.
And that's all for me.
Excellent. Well, we'll be back, particularly as we get through the relevance of the innovation ecosystem and what you've seen as you've touched so many different industries as some of the common gaps or the common needs. So this is probably a good entree into Simon. Simon, will you introduce yourself and share with us your perspectives?
Thanks a lot, Perry. And yeah, I hadn't realized that we had professional presentations going on today. So
well, not necessarily. You don't.
But I can share some views. I've got a bit of a deck here as well. So let me just share my screen and I'll talk you through a few things. So yeah, so a little bit of background to me. I mean, you can tell by the twang in my voice, I'm a Brit. I've been over in Calgary for now 6 years, loving every minute of living in Alberta. And I've got to learn a lot about really what happens in this province and this city, and also some of the challenges that exist and things that we can build on. I am by trade and my background is in industry. So I worked in manufacturing, I worked in change and turnaround management with companies. And I was fascinated by, you know, if there's so much improvement that individual companies can make, how can we support a whole range of businesses going forward? So my work has really sort of expanded from, you know, 1 to 10 companies up to thousands of companies of really understanding and researching across those organizations. And that's what keeps me really passionate about this space of what are the enablers of growth and what are the inhibitors of growth of organizations, and what can we be doing in the ecosystem to really support that process. And so we established an Center of Excellence called Growth Compass at Mount Royal University in the province. And Growth Compass is very much focused on really understanding and building this evidence on business growth and scaling. And so we run a number of different programs. We're essentially an independent center that works on these key questions. And we have both a community and a lab. So some of the work, I know, Perry, that we'll discuss today will be coming out of that community work, where we essentially are exchanging knowledge with the business community and the policy community around what supports the scaling up of organizations. And we'll also be looking at our lab-based work, which is where we run actual evaluation programs and support programs, whether it be growth strategies, innovation strategies, corporate innovation, to help companies pivot, help them persevere through various different components. So some examples of that, my background probably tells you that behind me today, but the Growth Catalyst, we've run innovation accelerator programs, internationalization programs, and we conduct a range of interactions with the business community and policy community. So lots of stuff I can share as we go through today. One of the things that I always start with from my perspective is high growth is really rare. So when we talk about growth and growth of organizations, on average, only around 6% of organizations are ever achieving a growth episode, as we call them now. And businesses fall in and out of episodes because growth is a one-off often. So actually, when you look at growth and you look at the data behind this, most companies only achieve one growth episode, and that growth episode only lasts on average between 2 and 3 years. And so actually a lot of work has to be done with understanding how do you catalyze new episodes of growth, but also how do you extend and sustain these episodes of growth for longer than 2 or 3 years. And so that's what keeps me up at night, and is where a lot of the work's going at the moment, because when you look at Alberta, actually there's a great proportion of companies that do not expand beyond the 20 million and this 50 employee mark. And so they get stuck at this growth ceiling. And this is something that we really want to understand more about. The reality as well, from a statistics perspective, there's more companies shrinking from medium to small these days in Alberta than there are actually growing from small to medium. And that is a challenging position to be in, because we need these ambitious small organizations, because they bring a lot of innovation, a lot of competitiveness into the economy, and really help our economy grow and expand. So we actually set about a whole range of programmatic work, and I can speak about that a bit more at some point, but essentially getting to this point of, well, what is the thing that catalyzes growth episodes in Alberta firms? How do you sustain them? And we found this scale-up gap. And so our work is around this scale-up gap. There's a lot of focus at the front end of this model around starting organizations, early stage, later stage, typically between that -2 and 1 stages of the startup commons phase development model, which is in the top right-hand corner. And that's what a lot of the ecosystem organizations sort of speak to and deliver to. But when you get to this early and later scaling phase, there's almost like a crossing of a chasm that needs to happen from this sort of 1 to 5 million type organization, this 20 million plus organization. So we actually work with a lot of businesses around that. And that's where we conduct a lot of our research, because we need to understand more about what's in that big box. And so this model is actually from the Lazaridis Institute at Wilfrid Laurier, where they're asking similar questions of what is actually in this scaling up box? How do we get businesses to grow within the province, not just start, but also scale? And so we've built a range of work. One of the examples is these 7 scaling strategies, which have identified and isolated what are some of the core components. You'll see that creativity is a component of that, which is very much linked to the innovation of products, services, processes, other components in the organization, which I know we're talking a lot about today with resilience and innovation. And so there's, again, lots of information and data we can share on that in the future. But what we tend to find is we have to focus on the leaders. And so there's a huge leadership component with these small and medium companies that if you don't focus on the leader, we're missing a trick. The biggest predictor of growth is ambition. Does the leader have ambition? Beyond that, it's strategy. So strategy holds the strongest relationship with growth after ambition. And so you see that within the mindset that these organizations need to have the ambitious and growth and strategic oriented mindset to want to build and expand. And so that's where we've been focusing on. We've run a range of studies around how these leaders sort of lead to scale. So I can leave it there. And you know, the network piece is huge of how these businesses work together. And I won't play the Growth Catalyst Blink video, but we can at some point during today's session if it's helpful. But it gives an insight to one of the specific programs in about 2 minutes that we've built for the province, for these kind of businesses that are ambitious to come to build their scaling up strategies. So we can talk about that some more as well sometime. So thanks a lot, Perry, for allowing me to share that. And I know there's going to be lots of conversation about innovation growth as we go through today.
I was superb, Simon. I mean, there's an enormous material there to discuss further. One of the points that you made, one, as you know, because we've discussed this at length many times, is the relevance of relational skills. That is, people understanding people and even caring about people. And when you talk about what's it take for an entrepreneur to grow, what does it take for an entrepreneur to stay? Why do we have so many cottage industries that tend to just stall rather than scale up? One of the things that we found in our research, and it's only a small element of what you've been doing, is the absence of relational skills in small companies that tend to love their technology or love their product, but have very little appreciation of the relevance of who their customer is, why they buy, where they buy, how they buy, who their staff are, understanding their suppliers. And this is one of the reasons why I've asked Kathleen to speak next, because in meeting Kathleen, it didn't take but a startup comment like the importance of relational skills to get her going. So Kathleen, it's your turn.
Thanks, Barry. So now I'm going to ask everybody to have a complete 180, and the creative on board has no photo deck, because I figured for sure that I would be just bombarding you with really dry fashion history, and we don't want to go there today. That's a different webinar. A little bit about me is that I have graduated from the University of Alberta in 1992, and I have a BSc in home economics. And so it's heavily science-based. Fiber physiology, dye technologies, everything from, of course, fashion history to understanding of geotextiles. Also, when it comes to really beautiful textiles and how they drape on the human form, pattern drafting, draping. I was very lucky to be part of the INNOVATION program at the time, where we had profs coming in from all over the place, all over North America, some of the best. And you know, a lot of what Irene was saying and what Simon was saying about how we support industries and technology comes into play with this as well. And I quickly referred back to what I'm seeing happening in schools and universities when it comes to design, specifically for me, of course, with fashion design, and how everything has changed quite a bit, and how my interns coming to me looking for this mentorship has actually turned into me really teaching what is lacking. But anyways, a little bit more about me. So I've been designing since '92. Mostly it was started off in ready to wear. They kind of teach you that in fashion school. Actually, I hate fashion school. It's far more complex than that, what most people think. But you were actually proctored to go out and dress the masses and make sure that you are in stores all over the country, if not the nation, the world. And that was the goal. And I got out there and I had a mentor who said to me, you know what, why do you want to do ready to wear? Because it's really high risk. It's so expensive, and you could throw all your eggs into that basket and it could not survive necessarily. And we know that the opportunities for survival in ready to wear and fashion is really low. Your chances are very, very slim because it's incredibly competitive, but also the support networks aren't necessarily always there. So my world has migrated from, or it's transitioned from ready to wear into now bespoke. And I've been designing bespoke probably really since '92 when I graduated, but it's been predominantly for the last, I'd say probably 15, 20 years for sure. And so I've been a mentor to many students coming out of a number of different institutions, design institutions. My world has also diverted into areas of industrial design, as well as designing for celebrities, politicians, rock stars, you name it. And just because you come from a smaller center doesn't mean that you necessarily can't design your dream and design what that looks like. And my portfolio is definitely very, very, very diversified. What I find really interesting about what people think fashion is, it's technically just a prevailing style for the moment. And I think because of social media, people think, well, if you're in fashion, it's really about what we see on social media. And it often feels to me a bit diluted, and it's often about just social standing. And for me, there's a whole lot more to it. And I think that's what I bring into my relationships with my clients. I love to educate. If they come to me looking for a specific look, a specific need, sometimes it's a specific occasion. Sometimes it's just they want a better wardrobe, because we can get into what it's like to shop online. And if you aren't a standard size, whatever that could mean, and that's another situation too, where we really don't have standard sizing, as we all know, that gets really tricky. And for the most part, I design women's wear. So a women's form is different in its shaping. We have more curves. We aren't as linear as men, and for the most part. So fitting off of online is often very challenging. So being able to connect with what people are anticipating, if they're approaching me from social media, if they're approaching me from a referral, which is often the bulk of my business comes from, I'd say easily 85 to 90% referrals. Even if it came from social media originally, it's being able to connect with people and understand why they've come to you. They've often come to you because they've run out of time. They've been searching for 9 months online to find something for said wedding, said presentation, or award ceremony, or just life in general. And they could have definitely come to you a little bit sooner, but you're still sort of virtually shopping, and you won't get that time back. So you've got to understand that they're at a frustration level. They also have these long list of needs, whether it's fit, whether it's quality. So you're filling in those gaps where often retail has dropped the ball. And it's the world of the slow fashion versus fast fashion. And we often feel like we're face to face with answering those fast fashion questions in our slow fashion world. And it's not always easy to answer. And we can't make excuses for what fast fashion has become. But I take the opportunity every time I can with my clients to educate them about what they're going to be wearing on their body, why they're going to be wearing it, and what it really means from a psychological point of view and sociological point of view as well. So I'm bringing to the table a little bit of a different, like you're saying, Perry, a bit more of a psychological point of view in my experiences over all of these years with what it's like to interact with consumers one-on-one. And they will tell you everything. And when they're not happy, you know. And there's no smoke and mirrors. And when you're working with somebody one-on-one, you've really got to know and to be able to read human beings, and everybody's different coming through the door. And that part of it is very organic. And you've got to sometimes check your ego and just stop and realize that you're there to answer a whole bunch of questions and a whole bunch of needs for what they're after. So basically that's what I do in a nutshell. I have a broad spectrum of design experience. I also had a company called Bipagogo. We designed a kids product that sold across Canada and started into the US. And before things got a little bit weird economically, so we decided to just kind of put that in a slow simmer, and it's still simmering in the background, but it's predominantly my women's bespoke, and now getting into men's bespoke. That is my main focus in my design world.
Kathleen, one of the criteria that I used in hiring when I was in industry was enthusiasm and a can-do attitude. You're hired.
Thank you.
But a bridge, for those of you that maybe don't see the relationship, the bridge between manufacturing and what you're into is in service is not typically understood on why would we have a service intensive individual and an individual with Irene heavily in the manufacturing. There is a common bound here, and that is companies today that can survive need to understand their customer as much as you do. And that's one of the challenges, to be big and act small, what I call personalization. Manufacturing is facing as much the customization or personalization of their industries as you are in service. So there is an important bridge here, but not readily understood and not readily embraced. So we'll come back to that in a moment. David, you're into policy. You somehow got to find that common ground that everybody will fit in and it will be a contributor. So share with us a little bit, David, your approach to the development of the innovation ecosystem and the relevance of innovation.
I'd be pleased to, Perry. Thank you very much. And if I could have Shannon put on the first slide. Just in terms of a bit of background, so I'm the founder and the president of the Global Advantage Consulting Group based in Ottawa. We actually have two others from the organization here, our CEO, Omer Kaya, and Shannon Wilson, who's helping me with the slide, who is our COO. My background, I spent 30 years in government, most of them as an assistant deputy minister in a number of economic departments, including Finance Canada, where I had responsibility for supporting the economic development of the various regions of the country, and then in particular the innovation agenda. So that got my interest, which I've then developed over the past 20 years. We've completed about 650 assignments for various governments, private sector firms, business associations, and universities. The topic then, what do SMEs need to be innovative? So Shannon, next slide. One of the approaches that we take is we actually design innovation systems for our clients. These can be at the national level, the provincial level, regional level, municipal level. We do it for individual organizations, and we also do it for clusters and sectors of the economy. And for us, there are 5 basic components in terms of these ecosystems. Provincial, federal governments, provide program support. There are tax incentives, regulatory systems, procurement that can offer assistance to a variety of SMEs. And they also offer significant research support to universities like our friend Simon. Provincial governments basically parallel track those kinds of assistance as well. Also, they give greater support for the university system in terms of basic funding. You then look at the input-output flow and the assistance given to the private sector. And of course, you have to segment that, and I'll be talking a little bit about that shortly in terms of Alberta and the structure of its industrial sectors from a macro perspective. All of these support programs then, which for the federal government are about $7 billion a year. For provincial governments, it totals about 1.8, 1.9 billion per year. These are all cost centers. They don't generate any wealth. Wealth is only created when you have a sale from the private sector, either into the domestic or global market. So we look at the link and the relationship then between the domestic and global clients that are purchasing the goods and services from SMEs. And of course, then you have a feedback loop. You have the revenue flowing back to the private sector, and then you have the corporate taxes and the personal income taxes from the private sector, which are needed to sustain this whole system. One of the things we're going to suggest is, in terms of looking at the Alberta data, that obviously there's a challenge which you're all aware of, well aware of, in terms of the nature of the global markets that Alberta is exporting to, and also the nature of the goods and services it is exporting. Next slide, please. In summary, then, we've done many assessments in terms of the SMEs and the challenges they face in different regions of the country. And there are essentially 10 services that have emerged in terms of what they need. We suspect, but don't know, that this is probably true in terms of SMEs in Alberta. And the first is access to entrepreneurship, education, and skills. How I actually got my start in terms of the business 20 years ago, my wife and myself, my son, and his bride-to-be actually took a course in entrepreneurship from City of Ottawa. What do you need to do? How do you do it? How do you hire employees, and so on? We are all engaged in different forms of business right now. So you need that initial kind of help in terms of, I want to become an entrepreneur. What do I need to do? Then you've got to have an innovative idea and do some research on it. And obviously this is your secret sauce. This is the key element. I mean, Kathleen, I loved your description of going from the ready-to-wear kind of market in terms of the bespoke market, and how that made such a difference, for you. So it's finding out what you're really going to be good at in a competitive way. Then you need access to business advice, marketing, sales, IP protection. We got engaged very quickly in terms of developing software and needed to get a better understanding as to how to protect it. Number 4, access to early stage capital, angels, accelerators, BDC, venture capital, and so on and so forth are obviously critically important as you're beginning to go through the stages of developing your business and your technology. Number 5, the access to technology due diligence. I mean, obviously, Irene, in terms of your description, this becomes very important in the key electronic manufacturing sector that you're engaged in for a firm that thinks it has a new idea, needs to test that out. Number 5, then access to federal provincial support, SHRED program, IRAP program, procurement programs, either provincially or federally, are enormously important. Number 7, access to talent, universities, colleges, and immigration. For our firm, we actually focused primarily on talent out of Algonquin College. I wanted people that weren't just computer literate, but also we design maps. So we're very much a visual organization in what we do. And I wanted that combination of skill sets, which we were only able to get actually as the core element out of Algonquin College. Number 8, then, access to business mentors and networks. This becomes enormously important. Irene, I love some of your descriptions in terms of linking up the SME into Magna and the supply chains that it has then globally to help that SME. Number 9, access to global market and technology intelligence. And, again, this comes from our Trade Commissioner Service. Provinces usually have trade missions in their key export-oriented kind of countries. These really can be enormously important. Some of the better clusters, in fact, have soft landing spots in those particular countries, so they can work and gain access to the regulatory regimes that they have to negotiate and supplier regimes in those developing countries. Some accelerators will actually have maybe a 2-week posting for their people into the accelerator in a developing market or in a mature market in another country, so they get the same experience. And then finally, access to global and commercial networks. So those are the maturing in effect from 1 through 10 of the services that we have seen that SMEs need to be effective. Next slide. One of the things that we then looked at, how many SMEs are there in Alberta, how many conduct R&D, and how many Alberta firms export? So we wanted to give it a bit of a, I hope that was okay, Perry. We wanted to zero in on Alberta just a little bit. Next slide. Yeah, here we have the data on Canada, about 1.23 million employer businesses. And again, in effect, Irene, you were using exactly the right data. I mean, it really is, you know, it's 99.8% are really SMEs. So the population of firms we're looking at are enormous. It's all of the blue plus the yellow component that you see here. What's interesting is that Alberta, with 164,188 employer businesses, has the same profile. It's no different. It's from, you know, just remarkably similar. So nothing unusual there, except you see the dominance of the SME kind of profile in terms of companies. What's interesting is that in Alberta, there are only 332 large companies that have 500 plus employees. One of the things just to note, because I had to raise this with the data that's collected by ISET and by Stats Canada, it actually includes public sector organizations in the business establishments which they identify as being businesses. So you can still find large hospitals, large public school boards, and large, public provincial institutions in there. So the number of actual businesses in Canada in total, that 500 or more employees, is actually less than the 2,978 we show at the top. We've done a calculation netting out the others, and it's only about 1,500. Again, that's a problem for Canada. And it also links into the idea of making sure that some of the SMEs in relevant sectors can link into these SMEs. Next slide, please. In terms of employment, again, Irene, your data was exactly right. 90% of all employees are actually in the SME sector. So again, that's the total of blue and the orange. So in Alberta, it's 1,389,000 employees of the 1.5 million employees are actually in SMEs, enormously important in terms of economic development. Next slide. This just looks at, we tried to then pin down, well, from the point of view of us, we're looking at SMEs that are engaged in developing new technologies, either hard or soft. We're not interested in restaurants or mom and pop stores. Those are very important, but they're not the key ones in terms of economic growth. For us, you've got to, we believe in the Michael Porter approach. You've got to be selling outside your jurisdiction to bring in the revenue sources into your jurisdiction. So we look at traded SMEs that are getting into global markets. So here we're looking at the firms that conduct R&D, so only about 17,000. There is no data that we could find on Alberta, but using the same metric, if it follows the pattern which it did earlier in terms of the number of SMEs, then ballpark, about 2,300 SMEs are doing, or companies in Alberta are doing research and development. Next slide. This then presents the next way of trying to get a metric in terms of the number of SMEs that are in that, really focused on innovation is key to their growth. So this looks at the total number of firms in Canada that export, about 50.5 thousand. The number in Alberta is actually fairly high. It's 5,305 Alberta businesses exported. So again, you're getting a metric of 2,300 that do R&D, about 5,000 that are exporting. This gives you a sense of maybe the focal point in terms of firms to be helped in terms of getting into global markets. We then looked at, well, what does Alberta export? And here you see the minerals, oil and gas, 61 billion, food, agriculture, and wood products. And then we looked at, well, who are you exporting to? Again, US is the #1 market, 77.5 billion, China 4.5. Go to the next slide, please, Shannon. Just to put this into a block diagram so you can see it out of 100, I think visually it shows the dominance of the mineral sector, which includes crude petroleum here. So this total of 67%. Again, when you look at, even if paying attention to, COP26 and the initiatives that are taking place, the fact that financial institutions are beginning to get out of carbonized investments, that there's a trend there that, again, has to be looked at. Part of the critical issue, obviously, for the Alberta economy over what period of time. What can all governments do in terms of helping to make this transition? You know, what is the speed of it? What's the implication in terms of communities and in terms of employment? But when you look at that focus, you know, again, on the oil and gas sector, by contrast, the number 2 and 3, food and agriculture, including beef and the wood products in terms of forests, I mean, these present areas of opportunity. But when you look at what do you have to replace in terms of Alberta's exports in order to ensure you have an economy that's going to be fully functioning 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, you can see the nature of the transition that is going to have to be made. I mentioned that I did this study for Doug Horner and his department back in 2007, and the conclusions were essentially the same as at that particular time. Now let's look at who Alberta exports to. Next slide, Shannon. Yeah, and here you see the dominance in terms of exports to the United States. So almost 85% of all Alberta exports go to the US. Number 2 is China. If you add those up, 90% of the exports are to those 2 countries. We just had a meeting between President Biden and Trudeau today. Biden has a nationalistic approach that he is looking at in so many different areas of activity. A very challenging political environment there to make a number of the changes to make more room for Canadian products in terms of the focal point of this American nationalism. So this is a market that is going to be troubled probably in the future in some areas. And then you have China in terms of Canada's relationship with China. So our number 1 and number 2 export markets for Alberta have very, very significant challenges as we look at the future. Go to the next slide then, please. The overall kind of conclusion I drew in terms of looking at SMEs and the importance they have in the Alberta economy is that there, to me, seems to be a strong need to diversify both the products that Alberta is exporting as well as the export markets. And I have no, you know, I mean, the magnitude of that task, I mean, is just really stunning. You know, I mean, the political implications of that, the implications on training that might be required in terms of universities and colleges, the investment issues and so on and so forth. But the sense that I had was this dominant one. At the time in 2007, where we presented this, we made recommendations in 3 areas that the government should consider, and on 2.5 of them, they actually put in the legislation to make some of those changes. But the bottom line was, you know, to change an economy takes, you know, 20, 30, 40 years in terms of investments. And the challenge is, how do you begin now to think that far ahead? How politically can you put the machinery in place and the infrastructure? Now, Perry, I was very kind of excited by one of the initiatives that you mentioned in Calgary that is taking at a kind of a local level and has investment coming in terms of supporting some of that transition. To me, those seem to be the kinds of initiatives that are extraordinarily important. And Shannon, just skip the next slide and go to the following one. This is, I'm not going to go through this at all, but this just looks at, we look at the total Canadian innovation system, thousands of data points in terms of how it works in terms of public sector, private sector, not-for-profit sector, input-output basis. What are you trying to achieve? For us, there are only 4 things that can flow between any 2 organizations: people, money, information, and stuff, or physical resources. And we map those out. We look at the feedback loops in terms of sustaining these ecosystems. And in the final one, we have done one of these regionally. Shannon, just the next one, please. Doesn't show up, Shannon? Oh, there we go. Yeah, for British Columbia, there's a new organization there, a regional development organization, which has asked us to begin to look at what might be done in terms of mapping out the British Columbia innovation system in terms of its structure and some of the challenges it faces. So I just wanted to mention sort of that ecosystem approach, again, looking at the roles that SMEs can play and obviously how important they would appear to be in Alberta. So thank you, Perry, and your colleagues.
David, that was absolutely superb. I think it's a great point to wrap up the presentation phase of the webinar with the discussion at the macro level, which you've now shared. And I was particularly caught with the fact that such a large number, that is the volume of enterprises in Alberta, are at that 98, 99%. I mean, that's the world of the Chamber of Commerce. That's the world of service. And I think Simon picked up on a similar point, and that is the missing M in SME. SME standing for small and medium-sized enterprise. Why is it that so many companies get stalled or unable or are uninterested? We obviously have lots of entrepreneurship. We've got lots of initiative. We've got lots of enthusiasm. We have lots of startups, but their capacity to grow from that startup phase to becoming a medium enterprise or a large one, clearly our ecosystem is heavily loaded on conception. But as far as maturation and growth, I don't know why we as an economy in Canada with so many resources and with such immediate proximity to the US market, why would we would get so caught up on the small side of the business? Maybe it's because we're so service minded, that the business of the Chamber of Commerce is to support our communities and grow with small businesses, dressing people properly, feeding them properly, making sure their cars are properly serviced. But wow, it seems our economy is upside down in order to be sustainable for the future. Do you want to weigh in on either of those comments, Simon or Irene? Or
Sure, I can put my 2 cents in work, but a lot of companies that we help start at about $500,000 and in revenue, and they've been very well supported in the academic side or the innovation side from TRL 1 to 4. But once they get to a working prototype and they need to scale and they need to do volume manufacturing and production in Canada, it's really daunting, and some of it is investment and the risk aversion of companies to invest. And then after that, it's really serving the local market versus serving the global economy. So only serving Canadian market is not enough. You have to start from the get-go and look at the global market and who are you going to serve globally.
But what was pointed out, I mean, we're doing the easy stuff. Maybe it's too easy to get to the US and very difficult to get to China. McKinsey Group, and I'll be citing this in our newsletter this coming week, the McKinsey Group now cites China's economy as the largest in the world. We've been forecasting, and with a country of 1.2 billion people, it's not surprising to some point their economy was going to outstrip the US. But clearly the Chinese market has been ignored. Maybe because the US market is so easily accessible. One of our viewers, I think, Barry, you're probably out there, you're helping us in a series of webinars we'll be doing and coming into December on the relevance of the Chinese market. But is it simply a language barrier? What are we seeing as difficulty of moving from simply a focus on the US to getting companies and individuals in this country to realize that there's a global economy out there. There's a great opportunity for Canadians. And it doesn't mean thinking north-south, it means thinking east-west.
Perry, I would like to interject with a comment. It's Barry. And it relates around what we call research. And what is it that we focus on for generations in Canada, and that is that fundamentally for sustainability, the marketplace has to drive what we do, and quite frankly, market research is the most important research that we do, but Canadians don't really, for whatever reason, understand that, and if you're looking for a reason for the outcome you just talked about, I would say the reason is that it's a way easier for Canadians to do market research in the US than in China. And it doesn't necessarily have to be. And that's maybe the major message I hope we deliver from the series of webinars we're having later. Now, I didn't want to interject on China, but you brought it up, so there you go. And I'll keep quiet and let others. But market research, the issue that I'd like to put on to the group is, why do we not consider market research more important than typical R&D as we define it in Canada?
Well, we are a very commodity-oriented economy. So, I mean, when we talk about wheat, meat, fiber, timber, oil, and gas, I mean, they are commodities, they're materials. We've got great distribution systems in pipeline and rail and cargo. This country has been an exporter of raw material to the US manufacturing for eons. And to transition that, which is what David has cited, and he's simply noting energy, but we've got the same issues in agriculture and forestry. And I know when I was a managing partner for KPMG and I brought industry leaders into the boardroom to talk about diversification, they made it apparent to me that Canadian companies don't actually have control over the product. The control over those products is held by the US companies that want raw product into their plants to manufacture. That we've got a major problem. Those relationships that have been built over the last 50 years with the US are not going to be easy to untangle. And our distribution systems are all north-south in their orientation. David, I'd like you to weigh in here because you've already noted that transition will be difficult. It's capital intensive. We have invested for 50 years, huge capital in building that infrastructure to feed the US. And now we want to talk about changing it?
Yeah, so let me give you some thoughts on the issue of, the challenge of we focus too much on small firms and helping them grow to a certain size.
Sure.
If you look at the average number of person in a firm today, so if you take all of those SMEs and you from the data set, you can work it out. I've worked it out, but it was a couple of years ago. The average size in a firm in Canada is about 8 people. 8 people, the average firm, and this is like, it's like 800,000 of them have about 8 people. Okay. If I look at the screen right now, I've got 5 little boxes across the top, including you, Perry. And I'll just take the next 3 down to Simon. That is the average size of a firm. In a firm like that, which, I'd gone through the experience, I'm sure Kathleen has, and many of you have, you're concerned about cash flow. You're concerned about your employees. You're concerned about getting contracts. You're concerned about delivering on your contracts. If you've got a new technology, wow, is that ever risky? And you're trying to look at, okay, my production facility, how can I actually get that going? And then someone says to you, oh, by the way, there's a terrific market in China. Can you, send Simon over to China for a couple of days to meet with a client that I've heard about through a trade commissioner to see if we can close a deal? It's not going to happen. It is virtually impossible. And I don't think we understand the nature and structure of the private sector in terms of, these hundreds of thousands of very small firms and the expectations that they need in going global. Now, in other countries, they do it differently. I mean, Canada is still a bunch of Boy Scouts in terms of our approach, and we're too narcissistic in terms of the inward-looking approach we have. Other countries take a collective approach. They do collective research and development and make it available to all firms that want it. The Germans do this so effectively. They will do on each area of technology, they will do collective research and make it available. What do we do in Canada? IRAP operates on a one-to-one basis. This huge amount of money, $3 billion that has been spent by the Strategic Innovation Fund, has gone to 74 firms. We do it on a one-off. Other people are smarter. The Europeans saying, no, the way to do it, let's do collective research, make it open, make it available to everybody. Then they support their firms in terms of getting into these export markets. And we should do more of that.
So I'm going to pick up on that from a number of points. I mean, it may not just be collective research. It may be that we are all very individualistic, very much champion of the capacity of the individual to carry the weight on our own. And I'm going to reinforce that with an observation that we found when we did our research. We visited communities throughout Alberta to try and understand through the Chamber of Commerce what it was that it took for companies to succeed and what was missing when they failed. And as you noted, money, marketing, management, manpower, moxie, mergers, marriages, metrics, all those things were necessary in order to thrive and make it through that valley of death. But not once in 100 interviews, not one time did anybody mention mergers and acquisitions as a growth strategy, which meant people saw one another as competitors. They never saw their competitors, potentially their ally, in building and growing a business that could scale as a byproduct of a marriage, as a relationship. I mean, we appear to be ill-prepared to market, ill-prepared to merge, ill-prepared to work with others and work together at the very small stages. And therein lies something which we need to start targeting and addressing. Companies need, and I don't know whether Kathleen, you want to weigh in here because you are I don't know, either a lonely entrepreneur, but so I'll ask you, have you ever considered, in order to grow your company, that maybe one of the strategies isn't just doing what you do today alone, but doing it with others?
You know, it's a really interesting question. As you're commenting on this, I'm thinking specifically about sourcing for what I do. I heard a commentary from a 5-star Michelin chef. He said, being a chef in Las Vegas is ridiculous because you are by yourself in the desert and you have to resource absolutely everything from everywhere else in the world. And sometimes I really do feel like that. It's really interesting in that I will talk to my American textile reps and I'll say, you know what, I'm looking for something specific. Can you help me out? He goes, no, I can't. But you know what? You need to talk to this person. I hate to say it, but when I'm talking to my reps in Canada, they're like, sorry, we don't have it. That's it. It's a dead stop. And I'm thinking, well, why don't we all work together and try to have this? Because the textile industry in Canada is just solved down to almost nothing really compared to what it used to be when I started as a designer. And it's really frustrating for me to actually have to think to order zippers, something very, very simple in a notion, from a different province just to get the quality that I'm after. Why can't we all work together? Are people worried about supply? Of course, nobody wants to have a massive warehouse where they don't know if something is going to move or not, but there is that missing relationship as well, even within the resourcing that I have to work with. And so that makes the possibility.
Simon, you want to jump in here? I mean, you are our student. You have the microscope on SMEs. Tell me why. Why is it that we can't grow simply by building and bringing together what we have today?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, fascinating conversation. I just wanted to share some stats because you're talking about, I mean, the sort of term that they use is business enterprise research and development. And I've just put a chart up on the screen and it shows how we compare in Canada to our international comparators. So you'll see Canada is in the last gray box, which is rated D. And when you start splitting out all of the provinces, we're actually in D- territory. So this is the amount of investments that's being made by businesses. And the question becomes, well, why is that? First of all, when you look at the global trend, we were starting to go up in around 2000. So you kind of got the sense that we might intercept other global comparators, the OECD average in that area, but we didn't. And we've actually since declined quite significantly.
What does business enterprise mean? Just the R&D?
Exactly. It's R&D investment at a business level. And when you sort of break this down and sort of look into that a bit more, it's the things that you've been talking about. It's the fact that our economy is weighted more heavily to resource-based companies and they don't actually perform much R&D in comparison to other companies. We have got this declining health of the manufacturing sector. So we've got a challenge there. And, you know, that's ongoing conversations in the media currently. And we've been replacing those things with, you've talked about service industries, but also construction. And those sort of sectors just aren't big, heavy R&D spenders. And so we have challenges around that. If you look at manufacturing as an example, you'll see with manufacturing that they're much heavier. Like they spend around over 4% of GDP would be in R&D in manufacturing. But if you look at construction and these other areas, you'll see it's under 1% of their investment tends to be in R&D. And so, yeah, there's questions here of, well, what do you do? Do you wait for the manufacturing sector to come back again? Do you hope that another sector is going to take its place? Do you increase competition? So do we actually sign more trade agreements, open up Canada to other organizations and increase the competitiveness? Or do we support companies in different ways? And when you ask about support, different countries support R&D in different ways. And so this is really just showing the difference between direct support to companies and indirect support through tax incentives. And what you see is Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, these ones that actually are highly successful with supporting R&D tend to support with direct funding to firms, as opposed to tax credits and those sort of things which are on the side of firms, that firms end up claiming back at the end of the year and using, accountants or people to find ways to bring money back into the business. So it's, if you can afford an accountant, you can claim a lot of this sort of money. And so to what extent it's actually helping us to increase our innovativeness through these sorts of things is a good question. Now, other things, Perry, that I'd like to share, I suppose, from my perspective, when I think about innovation, is one of them is the factor of family firms. So around 70% of all small and medium companies would class themselves or self-identify as family organizations. Family firms, when you look at and research them, they tend to be less innovative, they tend to be more risk averse, but they tend to be more sustainable as a consequence. And so that paints its own picture in terms of the level of investment from a family firm perspective that might be happening. The other dynamic that I would draw attention to is that there are a great number of firms. When I conducted some research back in 2017, around 50% of all Alberta companies, we surveyed around 500 across the province, small and medium companies, were locked into provincial or even regional and local markets. They did not trade beyond Alberta. Right. And the challenge with that is the research shows you have to be in at least 2 or 3 other markets. BDC have published research on that with high impact firms. You have to be in other markets to be able to grow sustainably. Otherwise, you're at the whim and behest of the Alberta and provincial winds of our economy. But the other component of this is there's a strong relationship between innovation and internationalization. They're called the 2 premiums. If you internationalize, you're more likely to have to innovate because you have to change your product and service and adapt in some way. And likewise, if you innovate, you're more likely able to internationalize because you've got something different, unique, or special that actually could compete on more of a global or international scale. And so they come hand in hand. So if we've got these firms that are locked into these regional provincial markets, and therefore they're not really innovating because they might be the only ones that do their special thing on a local scale, there could be a lot more of other organizations that are doing these things on a more international and global scale.
Okay,
and so
before we shift into strategy, I'd like to do that in the last 15 minutes. I'm going to sum up a little bit of what I think I'm hearing almost at a macro scale. We often talk about sticking to your knitting. I mean, Canada has what much of the US does not have, which is we've got access to resources: wheat, meat, fiber, timber, oil, and gas. It doesn't take much to compete in those fields because we've got demand in the US for those products, and we've got the infrastructure to feed it. So to shift the economy, other than Ontario in automobile, with the trade agreement automotives, I'll stick to the wheat, meat, fiber, timber, oil, and gas, because that's very much the Alberta economy. So if that's our asset, and we've got the distribution established, and we've got the trade agreements with the US, there should be no problem, but there is a problem. And the problem today is those trade agreements are fragile. One, the rest of the world is now maturing, and there is access to those materials from other jurisdictions, whether it be wheat, meat, timber, fiber, oil, and gas. And we have this new kid on the block called climate change. And climate change has all of a sudden said that one of our assets is no longer desirable. And in fact, government's going to step in and stop it. So now we've got a real problem. We've got an infrastructure for distributing a product that is no longer wanted. Now, what the hell are we going to do? Well, we got climate change saying that even in agriculture we may have, or forestry with the pine beetle we may have, or fires. So all of a sudden we're a resource-based economy going into a world with fundamental changes going on. We're being asked to change when we have an infrastructure in place. We've got an economy that has relied so heavily on resources. The one community that I see making a difference is the one suffering the most. Anybody want to raise their hand and guess which one that is? Which community is suffering the most economically in this country? And I don't mean the flood. It's Calgary. Why is Calgary suffering? Because the world no longer wants its product in the form that it has been in, which is raw oil and gas. And so what is Calgary doing? Well, you would think they'd be greenwashing. Well, they are. We're seeing enormous investments, R&D, in modifying that product so that it becomes more desirable by cleaning it up or exporting LNG or natural gas at a time when coal is folding. So one of the communities, David, that I see not waiting for government to do it for it, but entrepreneurs at the Kathleen-like level and the industry leaders that have felt the pain of their staff saying, we have to do something different instead of going to government and asking for a handout. And what Calgary has been doing is attracting new investment in a new economy in their community, which is a spinoff from oil and gas, which is infotech and the digitization of manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. So I see happening in Canada a phoenix, a bright light, the community that's been hit the hardest. And that should be no surprise. Someone told me when I was just getting into consulting out of the public sector, that the most sensitive of the anatomy has to get pinched before change occurs. And what's the most sensitive part of the anatomy? The pocketbook. And Calgary's been pinched. And what has it done? It's changing. At the individual level, not waiting for government to come up with a new shred grant or a new policy. It's doing it because it's feeling the pain. Okay, jump in. We got 15 more minutes on strategy. Energy transitions, manpower for the future, leadership and innovation. Who wants to jump in? Yogi, you always have something to share at this point. It's the audience time to say we've missed the point or right on. Go ahead, Yogi.
Again, I'm impressed
I'll
by
come back to you, David.
I'm impressed by the ecosystem, Perry, that you have exposed us to, all the talent that's available. One point we haven't talked about is geographic location of Alberta relative to important markets. I feel like we're at a disadvantage there. And I'd like to hear whether people agree with me or whether transportation methods, including air freight or whatever, in fact, have becomes low enough that that's no longer an issue. But I think geographic location is a problem. But you mentioned the Infotech Center. Geographic location that we have is actually an asset because our competitor is India and to some extent China and the Philippines. And they have two huge disadvantages. One is language and the other is time zone. So to me, this whole infotech / nearshoring business is a huge opportunity for Calgary. But I'll just stop with that and ask whether geography is a problem or not in the minds of others.
David, you had your hand up. You may want to address Yogi's comment, but go ahead.
Well, I will talk about it indirectly. And I'm going to build on the couple of the ideas that Kathleen had talked about. Just before the session, I had asked her about relational intelligence, and Kathleen gave a very good description in terms of your discussion of the transition that your business made. One of the things that I do when I look at any issue, I divide it into two separate components. One is substance, and the second is relationships. And in my experience, unless you get the relationships right, you're not going to solve the substance. And the way in which you deal with the issues of substance are relationships are quite different from the way in which you deal with the questions of substance. So to me, irrespective of geography, the issue of how do you work with all of the stakeholders in that particular region to try and solve an economic problem, in this case related to SMEs and innovation, should be the focal point. And to me, I was kind of sensing a bit of a transition that Calgary was making, Perry, in that regard. One of the things I would never do is wait for government I think the government is the problem in most cases. I'm sure you have noticed.
Would you say that again? I just want to reinforce it. I mean, I'm not picking on them, but the reality is in Canada, it seems to be every time we have a problem, we ask government to solve it. Only then empowering government further.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I think the writing is on the wall in terms of and part of, I have an element of sympathy in terms of governments. The issues are far more complex today than they ever were, but you increasingly have a range of challenges that governments will not be able to deliver very, very much. Just as in the last budget, for a federal public service that was tired dealing with COVID-19, stressed, burned out, there were 270 new initiatives put into place. That stuff is not going to happen. I mean, a few of them will, but it's impossible to do. And we're asking governments to do too many things. So, I mean, going back to that point, yeah, don't rely on government. So it's looking at this at the community and the regional level. Who are all of the stakeholders? How can we get a process in terms of building the relationships and the trust that are needed to solve these problems? So it's those softer technologies and experiences, and some of the ones you were talking about, Kathleen, that I think are going to be increasingly important.
Well, Yogi, let's pick up on that point as well. I think we have been building distribution systems in order to address the distance from market gaps. We've got the longest pipelines in the world, but now they may be stranded assets unless we can put something in them that can be distributed. We have a problem, yes, of distance from market, but in infotech, if you've got the fiber, if you've got the infrastructure for moving information, you are in the digital economy, and that may be why Calgary is at an advantage. It also has low-cost labor relative to Silicon Valley, which has made it more attractive. And there is labor coming from India, which is extremely well-trained in the infotech business. And I must say that in the last 2 years, the number of individuals that have come to me to be part of my LinkedIn network from Calgary's infotech sector is startling, of how rapid the manpower has adjusted in Calgary to accommodate the opportunities that infotech provides. And now industry is spotting it and locating there.
So I agree with you, Perry. I don't know if you know, I'm part of the infotech community here in Calgary, and we have a number of advantages. We speak English in the way Americans like to hear English. The Indians don't, and the Chinese definitely don't. We have the advantage of time zone. We're in the same time zone as our customers. They hate getting up at 2 a.m. to have a Zoom with somebody in India. And we have what you mentioned, which is the telecom infrastructure, which is highly reliable. And we have also other kinds of infrastructure like electricity and water and schools that all work properly, which some of those other places cannot say. So infotech is a genuine opportunity for us here in Alberta.
Okay, so we've made that point. We don't need to. We can emphasize it, but I want to wake Ling up. Ling, we've been talking about the need for speed, the need to be making accommodations that are quick. And I think one of the frustrations we have of relying on government is how slow the democratic process often is in order to make fundamental policy changes. You've been an advocate almost since we started this series of webinars about what's going on in China and how quickly China seems to be able to adapt. And I don't want to get into the politics of right and left and up and down, et cetera. But you've been pointing out that China is making rapid accommodations and adjustments rather than waiting to make, quote, the right decision. They're making decisions and adapting and adjusting as they go along. Do you want to weigh in on the need for systems to be able to be more adaptive and adjusting in this new economy?
Sure. Well, I just everybody know I'm immigrant from China 30 years ago. I still have a large family member in China who is in the manufacturing in other business. So I see how they're doing things. I compare the notes, how our innovation system works here and how I see down there. What I see, no offense to everybody here, is what we see here is spotty systems. you have a one spotty system to these sectors. And then, but down there, what we're seeing is a top-down approach where government basically give the quota to certain level and then filter down and filter down. And then, for example, my uncle owns a manufacturing in Shanghai. So what they do is locally, all people competing each other's become association. The association were taking certain initiative and driving the exports, driving the economy. So I think that is something I don't see it here at all, right? And here most people were competing with each other's, and in a way, we try to look after our own interests. Even myself, I've been learning within this kind of systems, and as I see that all the time, people very try to protect themselves. So I think that's an approach we need to examine. Whether it's wrong or right, it's working. So I guess that's something.
A point that was made, I think it was last week, was the relevance of NGOs into the future. We haven't talked about NGOs, but if NGOs are in fact collectives where industry associations bring members of an industry together to work on common issues, export being one of them, opening up new markets and providing market opportunities. I've seen that in tourism, for example, in Alberta, which worked extremely well. Our NGOs need to step into the game and become more relevant forces in order to help their players realize the benefits of working together, to find common interests, to open up new markets, do the research and innovation that's called for. I can recall a few years ago doing a series of dinners, not unlike these webinars at one of the country clubs in town. I would bring 100 businesses into the room. And someone asked me one day what I was doing. And I thought, well, I like being at the podium. I like bringing people together. I like a party. But then I thought twice about it. What I was doing was introducing people to one another in the same industry that had never met one another before. And the reason why is this was a new economy. This wasn't something the Chamber of Commerce had a handle on. These were all players in an economy that hadn't yet formed to become, quote, an industry. And it was in infotech and biotech and nanotech. But they didn't know one another. We needed industry associations to work together, but these industry associations are now fragmented. We can't get them to work together. So David, picking up on your point, and I think reinforcing a point that Simon's made, and Ling, you've just reinforced it. We don't want to be communists and socialists, but we want to work together. And if we're going to make a difference as a society, in order to make this more a sustainable country, we've got to learn to take the resources that we got, which is our people, and teach them to work together in the common interest. The difference between Edmonton and Calgary is Calgary seems to be very individualistic and entrepreneurship. When they got a problem, they work together. In Edmonton, we fight over what municipality is going to win and be king of the castle in some regional argument that's been going on for years, and nobody's paying attention to regional economic development. All they're doing is fighting out their municipal interests. Anyway, I'll have another glass of scotch. Thank you very much. Say, Mel, you got any closing comments here?
Well, maybe not closing comments, Barry, but I think we've had excellent perspectives on reality here today, and just homing in on oil and gas. I spent 3/4 of my career in oil and gas. It's interesting that our governments are really good at knocking the wheels off the wagon. When we consider how solar panels, how wind turbines and so on got to where they are, it was oil and gas that moved everything there. The digital economy, I think, is really the way we have to go. It does provide and support services. It can get us to that diversity that we really need to get ourselves to. But I think in general, I can't pick any specific item here that I've heard today that I really disagree with. Everything's been, it's almost as though it's been orchestrated, to come to the same theme that I think almost everybody on this screen will probably agree to.
Well, that's disappointing. I like controversy. I like conflict, but I like then the resolution. And I'm going to ask Omer, Omer's had his hand up for a while. I missed you, Omer. You're probably
That's okay.
with all apologies to Kathleen, you're probably the youngest in the room. So let's hear your perspective.
Well, thanks, Barry. The icons are quite small here. I mean, they should make them bigger. It's not very visible. But one of the points, it's a Zoom thing. We can send a message to them. They've been very innovative these days. But one of the things that I wanted to just add to the conversation is the importance of digital disruptive technologies. I mean, this sort of aligns with the point made by many participants, but also Mal as sort of the last commentator on the digital economy. And the question that I would really want to understand and perhaps focus more going forward for different regions of the Canadian economy, including Alberta, is how well do we understand artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, quantum, clean technologies, where are they going? And how can we apply these to the traditional sectors? Because I think that cross-pollination is where the new frontier is. And we've seen that actually in cybersecurity when we analyze at the national level. Calgary has a cluster in cybersecurity and it's growing, but in any other area as well. I mean, why not? I mean, these things are more and more accessible, publicly available, and as long as there is a very good support for leadership and talent production, and these new areas are really not known well and not really being applied to many different new sectors. It is really the trend in the next tsunami. So it's very important to make sure that we are up on that trend and applying to the traditional sectors, which are very, very strong in the Canadian economy.
Omer, that's an excellent wrap up and a point that I want to emphasize as we bring today to a close. And it takes a little bit of what Mel raised and what you have raised, Omer. Our universities need to be turned upside down. We can't be sustaining the status quo. We need to wake up to the fact that the digital economy is real, that China and opportunities elsewhere than just the US are real, that the distribution of commodities needs to be done in such a way that we're personalizing our manufacturing sector. The answers are in front of us, but is the leadership there in order to bring about with enthusiasm and a can-do attitude the changes that are being called for? I think we're all nodding our head. This country is ready to move forward. But somehow or another, the leadership seems to be lacking in the courage to say we have the greatest opportunity we've ever had before, but it means change. And technology and all these innovations that we talk about are accompanied by an appetite for change. David, you're properly placed. Make your point. Irene, you're doing a super job. Kathleen, don't stop. David, God, I wish I could bottle you and put you into every politician's hip pocket. They need help. They need a language and they need a perspective, and it's not status quo. So with that, look forward to our next webinar, which is our opening of a discussion on China, life today, business today, and the economy. And it will be followed by the decarbonization series as the energy giants of the future and of the past. We'll talk about an industry of Canada that is in itself making a transition, and it doesn't need Greta to tell them to do it. They're doing it on their own. So thank you all. Thank you, Anita, for joining us. Thank you, Barry, for your comments. Thank you all for participating.
Take care, everybody. Take care.
Everybody.
Gosh, Barry, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
If
you
anybody
very
wants to
much.
have an after party, hang around.
Thank you,
Good night.
Barry.
Thank you.